And then because this podcast is comedy history, could you tell us more about your encounter with Lenny Bruce?
Oh, yes. Do they know who Lenny Bruce was?
Well, this is the point of this podcast, is to give people these chapters of comedy history.
Okay. But I was in college and I went to a party New Year's Eve and this woman came in and we became friends and we started talking. She had been a stripper. Ooh, that was interesting. And her son was Lenny Bruce. And I knew of Lenny Bruce. Of course, everybody did. And she said, do you have a date tonight? I said, no, I'm just with a group of people. She said, would you like to meet my son? I said, who's your son? She said, Lenny Bruce. I said, yeah. She said, well, let me call him, have him come over and I'll fix you up. So he came to the party and we were all like in awe. I remember we were sitting on the floor and he was talking and he pointed to the ceiling. There was some fresco up there and we didn't know. And it was like, oh my God. Anyway, he asked me out. Again, my uncle said, no. You're not. I said, why? He said, because he's a druggie and he's 20 years older than you are and you're not going. I said, I'm going. He said, oh God, I'm coming with you. So my uncle came on a date with me. Lenny Bruce was doing a show at a club and afterward we had a drink. And my uncle and he got along great and I was terrified. I hardly talked at all. And he wrote on a napkin, Susan will go to the corner, but she's afraid to go around. It's really, really smart and very sexy. And he was, he was before his time. Richard Pryor and a lot of people that came after him admired him. Everybody loved him. And he was persecuted to death. This is Susan Silver. I was one of the first female sitcom writers, married Tyler Moore, Bob Newhart. I had a kind of a fun life that I've written about in my book called Hot Pants in Hollywood, Sex, Secrets, and Sitcoms. And it's a little naughty.
Yes, that is the voice of Susan Silver. And you have tuned into yet another episode of Comedy History 101, where we school you in comedy. I am Harmon. Hello. And we are thrilled to have Susan as our guest today. As noted, she is one of the pioneers of women writing on sitcoms in America. Susan was one of the original writers on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. She went on to write for the Bob Newhart Show, Square Pegs, and she got her start as a casting director on the iconic comedy show Laugh-In. Susan will also be sharing great stories about her encounters with Jim Morrison, Elvis, Clint Eastwood, and of course, as you've heard up front, the iconic comedian Lenny Bruce. But before we jump into the episode, a few quick plugs. On Thursday, October 24th, 7 p.m. at the Red Room in the Lower East Side, I'll be presenting my show, Tale. No hokey gimmicks, no dumb themes. Tale brings you the best in New York storytelling. And on Sunday, November 3rd, at the People's Improv Theater, I'll be presenting my show, AI versus Human Roast Battle. Come out and see a human comedian take on a machine learning AI in a roast battle of tomorrow. And I am thrilled that the show is going to Toronto. Yes, AI versus Human Roast Battle will be in Toronto on December 7th at the Comedy Cave. And you can find out all about these tour dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at Harmon Leon. And CH101 will soon be dropping our first audio documentary, The Grateful Dead Counterfeiter. It follows the cat and mouse tale between Stephen Marcus, who is the head of Grateful Dead ticketing, and Connor McKay, who was part of the biggest counterfeit ticketing operation that would scam people on Grateful Dead tickets. And The Grateful Dead Counterfeiter will soon be dropping on CH101. Also, show Comedy History 101 a little love. Drop us a few stars on iTunes. Give us a few comments on our site, Comedy History 101. Or simply subscribe. We also have a Patreon page, which you'll find on our site, Comedy History 101. Also, check out our new Instagram page at Comedy Hist 101. And now, without further ado,
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.
Hi.
Susan, how are you?
Good. I don't know what's going on here. Wait, can you see me now?
I can indeed. There is a bunch of framed pictures behind you on the wall. And yes,
Okay.
here's a connecting sort of opener. You're originally from Milwaukee. My grandparents are from Milwaukee.
You're kidding. What's their name?
The Rakitas. Okay, so East
Are you Jewish?
European. Yeah, so they're
Well,
East
all the
European.
Jews know each other there.
Here's a question. Did you go to Washington High School?
No, I went to Whitefish Bay. I lived in the suburbs, but I grew up on the west side. But my family has the biggest funeral home there called Goodman Bensman, was my maiden name Bensman, so they'll know.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They live in a neighborhood where it was like all the relatives that came over from Eastern Europe, and they'd always be walking into each other's houses, like without knocking. Just
They live on the west side, probably.
it was by Capitol Court. I know there was a street called Burleigh Avenue.
I wasn't allowed to cross the street until I was 12, so I don't know anything.
Yeah, so it's by where Washington High School was.
Yeah, I'm going to ask. I have a second cousin there. I'll ask him.
What I've read was how you got into writing. Maybe your uncle was a writer, Cy Howard, is
Howard,
it?
yeah, but he wouldn't help me.
But he went to Washington High School, I think.
Maybe. Yeah.
I did a Wikipedia check.
Oh, yeah.
So what about those early days that really kind of influenced your comedy? What type of comedy developed the sense of humor that became writing for sitcoms?
I was always funny, even as a little kid. I was like funny because I get bored easily. And so I would be funny to amuse my friends and stuff like that. And then when I was a little kid, we used to watch this will date me. I lie about my age. I say I'm between 50 and death. But anyway, the Sid Caesar comedy show was like the big thing when I was little. And we would sit in front of the TV with TV dinners on little tables. And my mother laughed so hard once that she spit her food out. And I said, oh my God, this must be funny. So Sid Caesar was sort of the funny genius guy that inspired me.
Just a footnote, just in the lineage of women writers in comedy, Selma Diamond
Right.
was a writer for Sid Caesar. Did she herself really influence you?
No, something, when I grew up, there was like she and one other person, Kalish, I think her name was, or something, or McCalish. And I didn't know anything about them. And at school, we didn't know anything. When I went to Northwestern for journalism, but I wanted to write comedy. So I went out to UCLA, and my grad school teacher was Francis Ford Coppola, which was the first real person I ever had. And we didn't see scripts. We didn't know what they looked like. There was no script or nothing. So when I started, it was like all from scratch. I didn't know anything.
And what was he like as an instructor? Was he Rain People, Francis Ford Coppola? Or
I don't know which one that was. He was great to me, and he had parties. We got to go to his house. We got to go to the set. It was fabulous. And he worked on my screenplay with me, and I won an award from the Writers Guild. I was the youngest person in my graduate school class, so he helped me do that. And then I met somebody named Isabel Leonard, who wrote Funny Girl, and she said, oh, you could be a real writer. And that was like the first time I thought, oh, I can do this.
And what are some like key takeaways that you learned from Francis Ford Coppola?
I don't remember. And he was fun.
Yeah.
Real deep.
And your script with the horror, and shooting very low light that you can't
And nothing
see.
like that.
No, just kidding.
Nothing like that. Yeah.
And then so UCLA, you met a young pre-doors Jim Morrison.
He was my best friend there. We used to hang out at
Really? How did you meet?
Oh, yeah. We used to hang out outside the theater department. There was a food truck, and we would eat lunch there. And he was the shy, sort of poetic kid with this bowl haircut. And we had these two friends, and I was like this Jewish virgin. We were like these, two like sensitive people. And he had a friend named Max Schwartz, who was like a motorcycle bike guy, and his girlfriend was Liz, and they were like scary, druggy, older people. And Max Schwartz became a very famous poet in San Francisco of the Beat Generation. But that's where Jim got his whole inspiration,
Wow. So he's just a shy guy back then. But did you see the seeds of what would become the Lizard King?
No, I mean, he's fun and sensitive and everything. And then all of a sudden he was at the Troubadour and I went to see him, was like, oh my God, but he then wore the leather, and Max and Liz used to take us on motorcycle rides. I was terrified.
Yeah. So like you said in your book that you were kind of like the Zelig of your time, meeting these iconic people from and I kind of want to hear more about all of them, from like Elvis to Lenny Bruce to Steve McQueen, the list goes on and on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I it was amazing. When I was in college, I was an extra in the movies. So I was in Viva Las Vegas, and I have in my book a picture of Elvis and me. I was a showgirl, and I walked behind him to see where he's standing at a pool table. And he had this group of guys, the Memphis gang, working for him. And there were like 6 guys that hung out with him. And they came up and they said, would you like to?
Sonny and the Boys.
Yes. Would you like to come to a party? Elvis is having a party. I said, yes. And I was living at my uncle's house. He said, no. I said, yes, I'm going. He said, you cannot go. I said, I'm going. And the party was like, I'm going to say like 7. And I got there 7:30 to be fashionably late. And I went into the gate and I pressed the button. The gate opened. There was nobody there except Elvis's Cadillac. So I said, this could be maybe just me and Elvis. I backed out. I went home.
Well, obviously, the softball question, do you regret that?
No.
No.
I mean, when I was in college, my life could have been ruined several times being the Jewish virgin. One time with him, one time with Bill Cosby, which, I wrote. I was the first Me Too person, probably.
Yeah, was the rumors, I heard that story, and were the rumors about him like circulating of?
No, I didn't know. First of all, I was in college at UCLA, and there was this show called Hootenanny, and a friend of my uncle's was a manager of talent, and he said, if you come to the show, you'll be on TV, and you can sit in the front row, and if you're very enthusiastic, we'll invite you to the second show, and then there's a party after at Theodore Bickel's house. Well, Theodore Bickel was an old, troubadour, I guess. I don't, whatever. Anyways, I said, well, how will I get to the party? And he said, you go with one of my clients who's going to be on the show. And I said, what's his name? And he said, Bill Cosby. And I had no idea who it was because he had just come out with his album. And I thought he was a country singer because the show was Hootenanny. So I'm sitting there and he was very funny on the show and everything. And then afterward, he took me to the party. We had fun at the party. There were all these famous people there. And then he drove me home. And he said, what do you want to do in your career? I said, I want to be a comedy writer. And he said, would you like to work on my next album? I said, yeah. He said, okay, we'll start in a couple of weeks. I said, well, what do we do? He said, well, you'll come over and we'll pitch ideas. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I was so excited. Told me about his fiance. He was engaged at the time to the gal he married. And we got to my apartment, and it was a little green sports car. And I was about to get out, and he reached over and it's attacked me. And I said, I did the Lucille Ball. I fell out of the car with my legs up in the air, and he drove off. And I was so lucky. It would have ruined my life, obviously, with, drugs, and he would have whatever, because I didn't know. And then, of course, we know what happened. So.
And then you went on to work on Laugh-In. Was it just so out of left field to have a woman as a comedy writer back then that the only options were no, you want to be in casting? Or
Well, that's exactly it. I had started after college. I got a job working for Nort Saul, the comedian. I was the associate producer.
The edgy comedian because he wore a sweater back in the day.
Yeah, actually, he and Lenny Bruce were the big deal, and Shelley Brown. I got a job. First, I was the assistant to the producer. Then the producer got fired. Then I became the associate producer. That producer got fired. And then all of a sudden, I was like the producer. I didn't know what I was doing. And one day, Mort and I were having a meeting, and I looked out the window and my car was being towed. So I ran out to get my car. And when I came back, the office was locked. My stuff was there. He fired me because I did that. Later, we became friends. But yeah, so then I was unemployed, and I saw an ad in the paper for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and I had done casting.
They just put an ad in the paper?
Yeah, new comedy show casting person. So I had done casting for an ad agency. So I got the job. And then I said, I really want to be a writer. And George Lauder said, well, you can't be a writer. I told this story in the New York Times. I tell it all the time. Sure, George is not happy. I said, why not? He said, because the writers are in an apartment and they want to wear their underwear and fart. So I said, well, They can do that in front of me. He said, no, they don't want to. We can't have girls there.
Was that a common thing for writers just to be in their underwear?
I guess I never was in the room. So
like why?
Then I became the writer's assistant, and I figured
On Laughing, you were a writer's assistant?
Yeah. So I think there's a picture of me in the book sitting there taking notes for the writers, but he wouldn't let me be a writer. And then I met a gal who was being managed by Gary Marshall, the late great Gary Marshall, Happy Days, Laverne and Shirley. And her name was Iris Rayner Dart. It still is. She wrote Beaches. But she said, we can write. Gary said he's going to form a company for his father. He was like big with nepotism. He says, manage us and we'll be writers. I said, fabulous. So we became writers. We did a Love American Style. And we did that together. It was my first show, and Gary helped us, and it got on. And then she took a break to have a baby, and I saw this show, Mary Tyler Moore, and I said, Gary, I can do that. He said, how do you know? I said, because I'm from Milwaukee, and she's from Minneapolis. It's the same place. I worked at a small TV station. She worked.
Can I correct you? I grew up partly in Minneapolis, and no.
It's that the state?
They're different places.
Milwaukee's except the people are fatter there, I think.
In where? Minneapolis? Oh, Milwaukee. Yeah. It's a little more cheese. It's a cheese state. So yeah.
Anyway, so he got me an appointment there, and I pitched. I didn't know that this is how ill-informed or uneducated. I didn't know you could make up stories. I thought they had to be real from your own life. So I went in with these 3 stories from my own life. Because they only had one woman there, Treva Silverman, they had never heard these stories. They thought I was like a genius.
So at the time, there was only one other woman writer on staff. And, oh, wow, okay.
And they wanted to hire writers. They said, if we get picked up for our second 13, because it started mid-season, we'll hire you. And so I became a freelance writer. I wasn't on staff. I did 5 Marys. And that was the greatest job ever because they were the greatest people ever.
And what from your life were in those stories that made it to the episodes?
Well, the first one was the most well-known because of the costume. It was every girl knows this, and boys don't know this, that you dread standing up for your best friend's wedding because you have to wear an ugly dress. An old camp friend of Mary named Twink Tvet, who was a real person's name that we had a real estate guy named Arnold Tvet. I said, that's such a good name, I have to use it. And she comes to the station and asks Mary to be a bridesmaid. And Mary doesn't even remember her from camp. And then she asks Rhoda, and they have these horrible dresses. And it became it's like the biggest laugh they ever had when she came out in that dress. So that was the first one. And then the second one was there was a job available at the station, and girls know this too. We love our best friends, but we don't necessarily want them in our nest. And Mary doesn't tell Rhoda that the job's available, and they all say, oh, wow, you're an awful person, and of course she relents. And Rhoda says, why would I want that terrible job? I have a better job anyway. So that was from my own life. Oh, and then the one that Ed Asner won his award, his Emmy, was when Rhoda decorates his apartment. And he had this homey, wonderful life with his wife, and she left. And when my husband and I split up, I let him take this awful recliner chair. That was the only thing he could take to his apartment. She decorated his apartment around the recliner chair, and Ed won his Emmy for that.
And what was the writer room like?
There was a writer's room. See, it was
in general, there wasn't a writer's room, or just like for freelancers or what?
No, there was no writer's room. We were all freelance. We came in, we pitched or wrote with the 2 producers, Jim Brooks, Alan Burns, and the 2 great other guys on the show were Lorenzo Music and David Davis. We came in, we pitched our show. They took the story, they liked them, they worked with you a little. You went home, you wrote the outline, you returned it, they gave you notes. You went home, you wrote the first draft, they gave you notes. And they were the only show that invited you to the table reading. So you were really involved. No other shows did that, and no other experience. I said it was starting on top, and the next 20 years were downhill after that.
Comedy History 101 will be right back.
I'm trying to use the phone!
And then how were other shows, just the nuts and bolts behind the writing process on other shows?
You'd pitch your show. They say, yeah, we like it. Go write it. And then they'd rewrite everything because they say, well, this isn't what we had in mind. And I'd say, I'm not a mind reader. You didn't give us enough information. So I stopped doing episodes my second year, and I started doing movies of the week and pilots.
Yeah. And just to back up to Laugh-In, tell me about Sock It To Me and Richard Nixon.
Oh my God. So one of the things I had to do doing casting was I had to greet the guests and bring them in. And everybody was a Democrat on the show, except Paul King was the head writer. He was Republican. And they wanted to humanize Richard Nixon. So they brought him in. He was sitting in the makeup chair, and he had just done that debate with Kennedy, and he hadn't worn any makeup. So I said, oh, let's not do his makeup. They said, no, he wants makeup now. He knows he has to have makeup. And so he was supposed to come out and say, sock it to me, which is the question. And 6 times he said, sock it to me. And they could not get, finally, he said it the right way. And they kind of said that he became president because we gave him such humanity on that show. It was like his ratings went up.
Sock it to me?
So we were responsible.
Yeah, I mean, again, it happens in modern day, like putting Trump on Jimmy Fallon, let Jimmy Fallon mess up his hair, and SNL, which is, again, satirical, should be punching up rather than having the people you punch up to be humanized.
Right.
How did that make you
I was
feel?
pissed. We were upset about that. But the other thing was there was a picture of him walking on the beach in a suit. I mean, he's not a real casual guy. But this made him seem human. He was very nice. I tried to sabotage it, but the makeup people wouldn't let me. So,
Did you by any chance on this podcast, we did an episode on a George Slater show called Turn On?
Yeah.
Did you work on that?
Yeah. It was
You worked on that.
One episode.
Yeah, they aired in New York and they pulled it like in Cleveland, like mid broadcast.
It was too naughty, and it was canceled the first episode.
And that starred Tim Conway.
Did it? I
believe.
can't remember. Okay.
No, yeah. We just did a deep dive episode on this podcast on it because it was like the shortest running show
ever.
And so you worked on Turn On. And
Yeah.
what was that like? There's no footage available, but if you go to the museum, the TV Motion Picture Museum, I think you can find episodes here in New York, which I always like. That's always sort of on my list of things I never get around to doing.
Oh, I remember also. I was in my office. By that first when I started, I was in the lobby. It was in phones. Then I got to have my own office when I became the casting. My boss died. I didn't kill him. Hal Kemp was a very lovely older man. He died, and I was there, so they gave me his job. So I became the head of casting. But I had my own office, and Iris would come out. We would write all day. Hard Love American Style, other things. So they didn't know.
Yeah, but what was the humor like on that show? Was it just ahead of its time, or just kind of maybe not?
No,
funny?
something. I like I have Alzheimer's. I can't remember. I remember that it was like a shock that we were canceled the first. George was not happy about that, but I think I had left probably. What year was that? Do you know?
I believe so. It was at the height of laughing because he had such clout that he could get a show like that on TV. So I'm gonna say maybe 69.
No,
1969, 70 maybe?
I was there, I was going to say until 70 or 71. It was probably 70, yeah.
Yeah, so that's just a legendary thing that no one's seen.
Yeah, but you know about that. Most people don't know about that.
Yeah, because it's the shortest running show that got pulled mid-broadcast. With women writers back in the day, was there camaraderie amongst them, or was there rivalry, or just in general?
There were none. I mean, there were none. Treva was nice to me. She was a friend of Jim and Alan, so she had as many as she wanted, and I was sort of the newbie. And after me, though, they did hire 25 women, so I guess I did okay. Yes,
for the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yeah, for the run of the show. Yeah.
And then how would you explain just your book, Hot Pants in Hollywood, just for listeners? Where does that title come from?
TV Guide did an article about me. This is me as Priscilla Presley wearing hot pants. Can you see it? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. So the article said the writer wore hot pants because back in the day, I actually wore hot pants to the taping of the show, and the press got a hold of it, and I got all this publicity, and it sort of made my career. And so when I did my book, I said to everybody, it was not my attitude. I was not Miss Hot Pants. I was married and a nice Jewish girl, but I did wear them.
Was there any backlash to wearing hot pants in the article because you're representing?
No, but now it's like embarrassing. But back in the day, it got me everything. So
yeah, there you have it.
Except my mother, who I wrote about in the book. We always had sort of a tough, a difficult experience, even though we loved each other. When I called her to say I'm in TV Guide, she said, "Are you in the cover?" No, always you can get an A-. You can't get an A from your mother's.
I've heard similar stories of that from so many comedians, when they have like, say, a movie out. I think it was like Steve Martin, like when he did The Jerk, his dad came to the show or it's the movie and said, well, you're not Jerry Lewis, are you? Or something like that. Just a horrible.
But now it's like, I apologize to everybody for wearing them, but that article got me a lot of publicity. And I wound up doing like the most half-hour episodes of anybody in my first year. I did 13 based off of Mary Tyler Moore. And then they asked me to produce Bob Newhart.
Hello?
The second year. And I took the job. And that night I wrote about this in the book too. I dreamt that I was working on the assembly line like Lucy and Ethel. The things were coming so fast I couldn't catch up. And I woke up in the morning. I said, I can't do it. I don't want to go into work. I don't want to be somewhere at 10 or 9. And I turned the job down. I was always a freelance person. I couldn't be at a place. I wrote at night and I wanted to do it in my own. And so.
Yeah. I mean, again, just with writing, and I'm a writer as well. And it's just like, there's this old story about, I think it was like Harry Kahn at the studios. He walked by the writer's room at like MGM or something. And he's like, I want to hear typewriters clanking. That's what I'm paying you for. And it's just like, it's something you have to do like at night or just.
And when you get that. Also, when I moved to New York in 75, I got divorced. I moved to New York and I ran into Lorne Michaels, who's a producer of Saturday Night Live. And he was one of the writers on Laugh-In.
Oh, and that's right. Yes.
I'm doing this new show. Would you like to be a writer? And I said, what is it? And he told me, I said, no, there could be I was the only woman. There could be a bunch of guys in the room yelling at each other and spritzing to get fighting. I don't want to do it. I didn't do it.
What was that before he hired? So, he hired Rosie Schuster and Ann Beats.
Right.
You would have been the first woman hire?
I think I would have been one of them. I worked for Ann Beats later at The Worst Experience on Square Pegs. I was the story editor on that. Yeah.
Yeah, like last year, because of my astute research skills, I was hired to research a documentary that was in production on Ann Beats. So I did like a deep dive into Square Pegs. And
oh my God, you didn't call me.
Well, I was just hired for the research. So, I did
well,
my
there was
part.
an article in TV Guide about it, in which they quoted me saying it was like working, pages after I left, they threw pages up in the air and they said it was like monkeys had assembled them because they were on drugs and they were like Saturday Night Live people. And I was like the grown up, who was supposed to control them. And she used to throw things at us and stuff. So, I quit.
Do you think like, what was it like out of control? Like I read that the TV Guide article. Was it like that?
Yeah, because we were in like Studio City or something. I don't know. And the writers, we were separated and the other people were in Norwalk where they shot the show, whatever. I used to go and play tennis with one of the other writers because nobody listened to and Andy Borowitz worked for me, the great Andy Borowitz, but it was a very dysfunctional thing. And Anne didn't like me. And, I was like brought in to be the grown up. So that was not a good idea.
Yeah. Do you think, again, that's one of those iconic shows that lasted like 2 seasons, but, is like the TV show Freaks and Geeks that was critically acclaimed. But do you think like part of the role, like, because Anne was put in the role of producer, and again, the sort of misogyny of like, say, early 70s, 60s with women writers, where suddenly you have a woman who's a producer. Did you feel that sort of backlash, like from the studio? Like,
no, it wasn't misogyny because I was the script editor, and I mean, I thought we had a lot of girls on the staff. No, Anne was just very difficult and didn't want to listen to anybody. And she came from a different place and it wasn't good. It wasn't a fun job.
Again, that was like the first sort of SNL, mainstream sort of SNL kind of spinoff,
Didn't hurt Sarah Jessica Parker at all.
Yeah, exactly. And then what kind of advice would you give to up-and-coming writers, in current era from, the experience which you have cultivated?
It's so hard now because it's such a different world. I mean, people ask me all the time. Of course, I retired ages ago, but it's so different because on the one hand, there's a lot more places. There's YouTube, there's TikTok, you can do whatever you want. And there's not the 3 networks and the smaller things. So it's a totally different world. I honestly wouldn't know what to tell people, but it's always good to be where it's happening. Like, get a job at a comedy club or get to know people at be an intern at a place. I mean, always get in there, and that's just the way to do it. But it's so different now. And I don't watch, the last comedy I watched was Veep. So there you go.
From all the sitcoms you worked on, what was, say, your favorite joke that you wrote?
Oh my God. Okay, it was Ted Baxter on Mary Tyler Moore. It was some mispronunciation that he did, and now I can't remember what it was. It was like he mispronounced a word, and Mary went crazy when she heard it, and I remember that. That was a good one. And also, like I said, my first of all, to see your name on television, and the first time, the Twinks Fed episode of A Friend in Need was Mary Tyler Moore Show, was just the greatest experience. And the costume people designed this incredible gown that, when Mary comes out, the laughs were just forever because she looked like Bo Peep, and I said all that she was a lamb and a crook, it was like, so that was a great experience. And as I said, it was the best place to work. Nobody else was as nice to us, and nobody else was as inclusive. And I loved doing my movies of the week. And they were both 2 top 10 movies, which at the time for comedies was rare. But I went into what was called development hell, and I talk about that. I was very successful. I did 20 movies of the week. 2 were made. So I got paid for the rest, but they're up there like lining the shelves, like little sad, whatever. I did 15 pilots. None of them were picked up. So after like 20 years of that, it's like, forget it. It's a very, debilitating kind of thing.
Yeah. It's like planting a garden and never getting to see it grow.
There you go.
And then what was it like, that first laugh you got, like from a sitcom?
Oh, that was good. Yeah. That actually, the first laugh I ever got was at Northwestern University. There's a very famous college show called WAMU. And because Second City was there, all the big comedy people came to it. And I was a showgirl there. I was like a showgirl all the time. And I wrote a sketch in which an astronaut comes home and nobody pays attention to him. And I was standing there. When I heard those laughs, it was like the greatest feeling ever. I still remember it. I said, oh, I'm going to do this. This is good. This is good.
And who were those Second City people of that era?
Well,
was it Nichols and May?
They were behind Dick Benjamin and Paul Prentice. And then I cast in my movie of the week, Paul Prentice. Yeah, it was great. And that was our dream, to be involved with Second City. And when they came to the WAMU show, I'm like, it was like amazing. But again, like I said, we were so removed from the real world. Now kids they go to all these film schools in New York. They know everything. We didn't know anything, and we didn't learn anything at school until you're in the real world. I didn't even know the format of a script.
And then Francis Ford Coppola taught it to you. Pretty big shoes. And then because this podcast is comedy history, could you tell us more about your encounter with Lenny Bruce?
Oh, yes. Do they know who Lenny Bruce was?
Well, this is the point of this podcast, is to give people these chapters of comedy history.
Okay. Well, there were 3 famous comics during that time. Mort Saul, who I worked on his TV show, he was political. Shelley Berman, who was just funny. And Lenny Bruce, who was the greatest ever because he was a truth teller. He didn't tell jokes. He told truths and stories. And because he was a bit of a druggie, he was pushed out of the business. He was persecuted. He was arrested, and eventually he died of drug overdose. But I was in college, and I went to a party New Year's Eve, and this woman came in, and we became friends, and we started talking. She had been a stripper. Ooh, that was interesting. And her son was Lenny Bruce. And I knew of Lenny Bruce. Of course, everybody did. And she said, do you have a date tonight? I said, no, I'm just with a group of people. She said, would you like to meet my son? I said, who's your son? She said, Lenny Bruce. I said, yeah. She said, well, let me call him, have him come over, and I'll fix you up. So he came to the party, and we were all like in awe. I remember we were sitting on the floor, and he was talking, and he pointed to the ceiling. There was some fresco up there, and we didn't know. And it was like, oh my God. Anyway, he asked me out. Again, my uncle said no. You're not. I said, why? He said, because he's a druggie, and he's 20 years older than you are, and you're not going. I said, I'm going. He said, oh God, I'm coming with you. So my uncle came on the date with me. Lenny Bruce was doing a show at a club, and afterward we had a drink. And my uncle and he got along great, and I was terrified. I hardly talked at all. And he wrote on a napkin, Susan will go to the corner, but she's afraid to go around. And I say that was very valuable. Somebody stole it from my house when it was rented, but he was amazing. Of course, there was a movie made about him. He was a genius and very sexy. And interestingly enough, Brandeis had his daughter, Kitty. He was married to a stripper also. Brandeis has a college museum there, and they did a room for Lenny Bruce. And I was asked to go speak because a friend of mine was his attorney, Martin Garbus, during all of his difficulties. And I had said I knew him, and they said, how'd you know him? I said, well, I went out and know him. So all these people were there talking about the First Amendment, and I was like the blonde, and I went out with him. I mean, it was like the weirdest thing I had ever done in my life. But I met the daughter, and we talked, and yeah, he was quite an idol.
And what stage in his career was he when you met him? Was he at the
A year before he died?
Oh wow! So he was still like at the clubs reading his legal kind of transcripts,
yep. Right?
Which again, you can't forget the funny, you know.
Beyond funny, he was so well. Just the fact that he knew me for 2 minutes and knew who I was. I mean, it's really, really smart and very sexy, and he was. He was before his time. Richard Pryor and a lot of people that came after him admired him. Everybody loved him, and he was persecuted to death.
Yeah, I mean, just for talking into a microphone
and saying things that other people wouldn't say. He told the truth about religion. He told the truth about the government. He told the truth about everything.
Yeah. The predecessor to like George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and so on and so on. And just a couple last questions here. What is your favorite story in your book?
Oh, favorite story in my book? Hot Pants in Hollywood. So the subtitle is Sex, Secrets, and Sitcoms. So I guess the funniest thing that happened to me was with Clint Eastwood. Do you remember that one?
Share it with everyone.
Well, I was an extra in college, and I was at MGM in some show. I don't remember what. And I was walking towards the parking lot, and this little sports car pulled up, and a really cute guy was in there, and he said, would you like a ride to the parking lot? And I said, no, I don't know you. And he said, well, it's okay. I'm an actor, and I'm well known. And I said, well, what's your name? He said, Clint Eastwood. I said, what's the show? He said, Rawhide. I said, well, I never saw it. And I just kept walking. Now, years later, it's Clint Eastwood, right? And I'm divorced by then, and I'm at a restaurant, Morton's in LA, with a friend of mine. And on the plane coming, I had seen this guy who was a manager. I can't remember his name now. And he was having dinner with Clint Eastwood. And I said to my friend, I'm going to walk by. I'm going to say hi to the guy. And then I'm going to say to Clint Eastwood, you asked me out years ago, and I was really stupid, but I'm single now and everything. She said, okay, go. So I walked by. I said hi, and they both said hi. And so I said it. And he said, well, okay, would you like to go to dinner Saturday night? And I said, oh, I'm leaving town Friday. He said, well, stay over. And I said, well, I can't, but thanks. And I went back to the table, and my friend said, are you nuts? You've now turned down Cleese twice. I said, well, he's an actor. What is he now? Okay, dissolve. Now he's the mayor of a town. He's brilliant. He's an Academy Award. He's a director. He's a poet. He's everything. And I go to a screening of Gran Torino, the movie, and I say to my friend, I'm going to go up. I'm going to tell him, and I say, so I walk up, I say, Clint, I don't know if you remember me, but you asked me out once in college and once later. And he said, no, this is my wife, Dina. That was the end of that.
Lastly, where can people find the book?
On Amazon. It's fun. And it's also, I will say, one of the great things is grown men have cried, the part about my dad. There's truth in it. There's sad, there's fun. And I think it's the best thing anybody ever said about it was like having lunch with me. I did the Audible too, so that's fun, and I hope you like it.
Thanks. And anything that I haven't asked you about the book that you would love to share? Or
no, I would like to get married again. If you could find me someone that's 65 and 75, tall, although I've shrunk a little, so it doesn't have to be as tall. Fun, not a trumper, obviously. Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Yeah. Thank you. It was great meeting you.
You too, honey. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
And that wraps up today's episode of Comedy History 101. I believe you've gotten schooled in comedy. I like to thank our guest, Susan Silver. Be sure to check out her book, Hot Pants in Hollywood. Also, a quick correction. I said Harry Kahn was the head of MGM Studios, when in reality, he was the head of Columbia Pictures. And I pose this question to the listeners. Would you turn down a date with Elvis Presley? But we're talking 1977 Elvis Presley. Share your thoughts on our site in the comments. ComedyHistory101.com. Also remember to like, subscribe, and give us a few stars on Comedy History 101 on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And here are the quick plugs right away. Thursday, October 24th, 7 p.m., Tale, NYC's finest storytelling at the Red Room. And on November 3rd, 7 p.m. at the People's Improv Theater, AI versus Human Roast Battle. And you can find out all about my show dates on my site, harmonleon.com, or on the social medias at harmonleon. And until next time, bye-bye.
You're stupid. Everybody's so stupid.
I'm trying to use the phone!
Comedy History 101.